It was supposed to be a routine tribunal, the kind where military brass pretend they care about ethics for exactly 43 minutes before hitting the diplomatic minibar. Commander Andrea "Andy" Steele had just delivered a flawlessly sarcastic testimony regarding the Varnak incident, also known as that time someone thought a children's hospital was a weapons depot, when the courtroom screens flickered. Every attending species turned toward the central display with the slow dread of bureaucrats realizing something had actually happened. The footage played in grainy thermal. The UNS Serenity, a designated hospital vessel marked with 50-meter-wide red crosses and a glowing peace beacon, was reduced to plasma dust by a Gralcan Dominion cruiser with the grace of a sledgehammer trying ballet. The camera even caught a floating zero-gravity support dog drifting past the viewport, tail wagging before being atomized. The galactic room fell into stunned silence. Commander Steele, still holding her mug labeled, "This is my diplomacy juice," simply said, "Oh, hell no." 15 minutes later, she was airborne aboard the UTS Kraken's Fang, already donning her armor and requesting two things: the full fleet manifest and a metric ton of high-protein snacks. The order from Earth Command was blunt: unleash the Kraken and bring snacks. Meanwhile, in the overcompensatingly spiky halls of the Gralcan Dominion flagship, Hegemonic Splendor, Admiral Fregthar Zurn was posing for a motivational hollow portrait in front of a burning orbital wreck, oblivious to the fact he had just launched his empire's final season. "Glory to Gralcan," he barked, while a junior officer quietly tried to Google Serenity on a flickering datapad and started sweating through his carapace. Back on Steele's warship, her team, an elite brew of sarcastic human commandos and emotionally volatile AI assistants, were already drafting psychological operation payloads. Ensign Cheeto, the ship's AI, insisted on blasting Ride of the Valkyries over enemy channels while editing a compilation of Steele's best "I told you so" expressions. The Kraken protocol wasn't designed to retaliate. It was designed to unravel. Step 1. Make the enemy realize they messed with the wrong apex biped. Step 2. Exploit every ounce of arrogance and ceremonial excess they had. Step 3. Rearrange their empire's spine, metaphorically and sometimes literally. As the Kraken's Fang exited warp near the Gralcan frontier, it was joined by 71 other human ships in perfect formation. The Gralcan border sent a single automated warning beacon that translated roughly to, "You are trespassing upon sacred imperial airspace." Steele replied by transmitting her own video message. She stood in full SEAL armor, tactical braid sharp enough to cut steel, holding a protein bar like a knife and saying, "You broke the Geneva Convention. We're here to audit your soul." Then the war started, or at least that's what the Gralcans called it. The humans, however, seemed more like performance artists with a grudge. They didn't fire on cities. They didn't attack civilian convoys. They intercepted military targets, disabled them with gravity-based imploders that made enemy ships fold like IKEA chairs in a hurricane, and then broadcast taunting commentary like, "Oops, did we knock on the wrong hatch? Our bad. Here's a pamphlet on strategic embarrassment." Commander Steele never once raised her voice. Her sarcasm did the heavy lifting. And while Gralcan officials shouted across their galactic channels about honor, vengeance, and ritual outrage, Steele calmly replied, "We understand. That's why we're here, to help you reorganize your honor. And your plumbing. Mostly the plumbing." On the Gralcan homeworld, panic began to bubble under the ceremonial crust. The High Committee of Unquestionable Overlords held a 23-hour emergency meeting in a hall with more banners than sense. Their response? Loud condemnation and declaring humans psychologically incompatible with surrender etiquette. In return, the UTS fleet beamed down humanitarian rations and copies of the Geneva Convention, with sarcastic footnotes, as Commander Steele leaned back in her command chair, sipping reconstituted espresso from her battered Chaos Coordinator mug. She muttered to herself, "They nuked a ship full of therapy dogs. We're not even mad. We're motivated." Somewhere in the galaxy, an admiral hiccuped in fear. The curtain had just risen on the galaxy's first interstellar war fought entirely with psychological warfare. Sarcastic one-liners, strategic snack logistics, and the overwhelming power of not being taken seriously, until it was far too late. The Gralcon Dominion had spent centuries perfecting the art of looking impressive while doing absolutely nothing of strategic value. Adorned in layers of honor sashes, feathered exocapes, and thick manuals of ceremonial fleet doctrine no one actually read. So when 72 human warships slipped past their border sensors like caffeinated sharks through wet cardboard, the High Committee responded with the appropriate level of intellectual rigor. They screamed. Commander Andy Steele, however, didn't scream. She didn't even blink. From the bridge of the UTS Kraken's Fang, she watched the enemy fleet stumble into formation like hungover parade floats, her face blank except for the gleam of a tactical smirk that should have been classified as psychological warfare. "Fleet integrity at 70%, Ensign Cheeto announced cheerfully, meaning 30% of them have either crashed into each other or are trying to dock backwards. Steele sipped her protein sludge and tapped her gauntlet. "Time to introduce Phase 2. Deploy the playlists." Moments later, across every Gralcon military channel, the steady bass line of "Highway to the Danger Zone" began blasting, followed by intercut transmissions of humans, mock commentating, Gralcon maneuvers like sports announcers. "And there goes another flagship into an asteroid. Ouch, that's going to leave a generational scar." The psychological needle had been inserted. Now came the twist. Instead of launching an attack, the Terran fleet initiated a synchronized orbital maneuver that formed the shape of a passive-aggressive smiley face visible from the Gralcon capital. Steele had requested that detail personally. "Subtlety," she said, "is for species that didn't lose their favorite therapy beagle in a diplomatic oopsie." The Gralcon admirals, misreading the maneuver as a threat display, ordered a full-scale counterattack, unfortunately without coordinating with each other, or checking if their weapons were still attached to the correct ships. Within minutes, 3 of their cruisers had accidentally fired upon a diplomatic shuttle, a moonbase, and themselves. Human comms didn't mock them. They offered help. "We noticed you're struggling with projectile alignment. Would you like a targeting assistant? Or just a hug?" While the Gralcons descended into furious confusion, Steele quietly deployed her next play, Operation Side-Eye. A contingent of stealth drones slipped into Gralcon space, bypassed every security node with ease, and infiltrated the Kragnos research station, the pride of Gralcon intelligence, a vast installation protected by 12 warships, a ceremonial moat, and an AI named Pruddock who once got outwitted by a calculator. The humans didn't fire a shot. Instead, the lights inside Kragnos flickered, then flickered again. And when they returned, every monitor displayed the same recorded hologram: Commander Steele, sitting on a crate labeled Strategic Snacks, lazily spinning a knife-sized protein bar in her fingers. "Hello again," she said. "I know. You're used to threats, but humans don't do threats. We do promises. Here's one. Surrender the officers responsible for bombing the Serenity, and we'll spare your bathrooms. Refuse, and we'll get weird." The message ended with her raising an eyebrow so sharp it was practically a war crime. On the Dominion homeworld, chaos bloomed. Protests erupted as civilians began realizing the humans weren't the monsters. They were the judgmental neighbors who remembered everything. Reports spread that Gralcon military cafeterias had been replaced with crates of Earth snack rations, labeled shame bites, now with extra regret. Meanwhile, the High Committee tripled down on bluster, issuing a statement calling humanity an unstable subspecies of mammal with delusions of restraint. Commander Steele responded by publicly donating 70 tons of therapeutic plush sloths to Gralcon refugee centers. "We care," she said in a broadcast, "and caring is the scariest thing we do." Admiral Zern, still unaware of the scale of the collapse, prepared a retaliatory speech with 14 costume changes and a backup choir. Before he could finish his first dramatic pause, his own crew locked the blast doors, and requested asylum through a human diplomatic envoy named Brenda, who handled peace negotiations and catered events. By the time Zern realized what was happening, most of his fleet had either surrendered, defected, or been pacified by streaming Earth documentaries titled War is Dumb, A Beginner's Guide. Commander Steele didn't fire a single missile. She didn't need to. The war was happening in boardrooms, mines, and intercepted group chats where Gralcon soldiers begged their mothers for transfer papers. And as Steele's ship coasted silently, through Gralcon airspace, her voice echoed once again across every frequency. Phase 3 approaches. Brace your egos. Somewhere beneath the palatial disaster of the Gralcon Council dome, the High Committee of Unquestionable Overlords was busy doing what they did best, arguing in circles while their empire burned in straight lines. Every attempt at countering, the humans had failed, not due to a lack of weapons, but a lack of understanding. The Dominion's entire military doctrine was built on the premise that loud declarations, unnecessarily ornamental weapons, and ceremonial shoulder salutes would be enough to scare most civilizations into submission. But humanity didn't scare. They took notes, added memes, and made playlists. Commander Andy Steele, from the comfort of her bridge aboard UTS Krakens, Fang had just greenlit Phase 3 of Protocol Kraken, strategic disruption. No more subtlety. No more sarcasm-laced warnings. This was the part where humanity got experimental. Her first move? Infiltrating the Dominion's financial sector with a virus disguised as an overdue parking ticket. Within hours, the Gralcon Central Economic System began issuing refunds to long-dead nobles, charging live officers interest on their own medals, and, perhaps most devastatingly, rerouting defense funding into mental health seminars titled, So You're Not as Strategically. Sound as you thought. Meanwhile, on the newly hijacked Kragnos research station, human operatives were installing what could only be described as aggressive mood lighting and rotating inspirational posters of Commander Steele with quotes like, "Your empire is about to be emotionally exfoliated." When Dominion officials stormed the station to reclaim it, they found the halls repainted in calming pastel colors, the AI product reprogrammed to greet them with Namaste, tactical underachiever, and the data core filled with Earth files, including Steele's official report titled Gralcon War Strategy, The Art of Losing Loudly. Back on the Dominion's capital moon, protests had become defections. Defections became recruitment videos, and those videos somehow ended up playing at every military academy across the Empire. Commander Steele hadn't even entered the atmosphere, and yet entire cities were drafting "We're sorry" banners just in case. Every move she made was coordinated, precise, and cruel in the most polite way possible. Portable human transmitters were dropped into major cities, broadcasting Steele's message in an endless loop. We're not here to conquer. We're here to help you fix yourselves before someone else vaporizes the warranty. It wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was customer service. And if the Dominion had one weakness more fatal than hubris, it was their inability to survive. Bureaucratic politeness under pressure. While Admiral Zern's remaining ships tried to regroup, they found themselves harassed by stealth drones projecting giant floating images of Steele's face mid-eye roll with the caption "Still Waiting." One cruiser opened fire on what turned out to be a human decoy shaped like a vending machine. The explosion caused a cascade failure in their propulsion grid, launching them into a low orbit where they spun endlessly while playing the Earth Children's song, "The Wheels on the Bus," on loop. Commander Steele, meanwhile, gave a press conference from low orbit, hovering above the Gralcon homeworld aboard a sleek command shuttle shaped like a sarcastic dagger. "We asked for the officers responsible. You gave us parade speeches. So, here's how this goes now. No more threats, no more bluster. The next step involves every diplomatic toilet in your palace suddenly playing the Terran national anthem. We're in your pipes, gentlemen." The Gralcon's civilian population was already broken by this point, not from violence, but from the creeping horror of knowing the humans were both technologically superior and deeply, irreparably petty. Children refused to attend mandatory war. Hymn recitals. Military mascots vanished, reappearing on human broadcasts wearing Earth-made t-shirts that read, "I used to be a propaganda lizard." And somewhere, deep beneath the Parliament of Supreme Valor, a maintenance AI began reciting Steele's speech from memory, calling it more emotionally coherent than the Council's last 5 declarations of war. And still, Steele hadn't fired a single direct shot at a civilian. The terrifying precision of her restraint, the way every human move was measured, ironic, and almost loving in its dismantling of a galactic war machine, it crushed morale far more effectively than plasma bombardments ever could. By the end of the 3rd week, Dominion fleet reports simply stopped coming. Not because the fleets were destroyed, but because no one wanted to admit they were still losing to an enemy that offered therapy before weaponry. As the next sunrise rose over the cracked marble spires of the Gralcon capital, a new banner was unfurled. Not a declaration of resistance, but a question painted in bold Terran script across the Grand Council Tower. "Can we talk?" Commander. Steele, still seated in her bridge chair with one leg draped over the armrest, raised her mug and whispered, "They're ready." Phase 4 had just begun. The dawn of Phase 4 didn't come with explosions or orbital firestorms. It came with the gentle hum of bureaucracy, the rustle of printed treaties, and the polite clearing of throats at a frequency that made Gralcon admirals visibly twitch. Commander Andy Steele arrived not aboard a warship, but a gleaming mobile peace platform known as Sanctuary Arc 2, a 30-kilometer-long station with diplomatic gardens, medical bays, and something far more terrifying. Legal offices, staffed by Terran space lawyers in armored suits and aviators who referred to every sentence as Exhibit A through Hell. The Ark parked itself in high orbit above the Gralcon capital, its sleek surface reflecting sunlight like a judgmental mirror, while every Dominion channel was overridden with a message from Commander Steele. "We're here to help. But first, please review this document, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Ceasing Fire Without Exploding." As the station's hatches opened, thousands of civilians lined up beneath banners that once hailed war, but now featured slogans like, "Better disarmed," then disemboweled, and "Hugs, not hull breaches." Meanwhile, the Dominion military imploded in slow motion. Troops refused orders, officers feigned amnesia, entire battalions began knitting. The High Committee of Unquestionable Overlords, surrounded by paperwork, handcuffs, and free therapy, dogs offered by Terran peacekeepers, realized the Empire was no longer being defeated. It was being restructured by interstellar social workers with laser-guided PowerPoint slides. Admiral Zern, finally grasping the full cosmic scale of his screw-up, requested a private channel with Steele. She appeared on his holoscreen mid-burrito, unfazed, holding up a napkin that read, "Your move, Krabby." Zern, reduced to a twitching claw and a shredded sash, whispered, "What do you want?" Steele answered with terrifying calm. "Accountability, disarmament, free snacks for displaced civilians, and an apology letter written in something other than ceremonial blood ink." She paused. "Also, you're going to host the trials on live broadcast. That way, everyone sees that we're better at justice than you were at intimidation." Zern gulped, then nodded like a crustacean caught in a philosophical trap. The trials began within days, televised events with terrifying viewership across the galaxy. Human prosecutors read charges while sipping tea. Gralcon defendants wore court-issued robes with the phrase, "Oops, our bad," printed in 12 languages. Steele's testimony alone caused 5 minor heart attacks and 1 philosophical awakening in a committee member who spontaneously declared himself a pacifist and left to open a bakery. But Steele wasn't done. As the political scaffolding of the Dominion cracked and creaked under the weight of satire and unrelenting professionalism, she deployed her final weapon, narrative control. Documentaries emerged across galactic networks. How to Lose a War Without Dying, The Tactical Power of Passive-Aggressive SEALs, and Why Humanity is Just Done with Your Imperial Nonsense. Children on alien worlds began dressing as Steele for diplomatic. Roleplay. A popular Gralcon dating app changed its relationship statuses to emotionally available, strategically reformed, and would surrender to Steele. The final blow came not with fire, but with applause. At a massive open-air ceremony beneath the fractured spires of the council dome, the new Gralcan Interim Peace Council was sworn in, overseen by a human delegation that brought therapy sloths, plant-based snacks, and a brass band playing ironic renditions of former Gralcan anthems. Steele stepped onto the central stage, flanked by Terran advisors and her AI, Ensign Cheeto, who played a chime every time someone lied on stage. Her speech was short, brutal, and unforgettable. "We didn't come here to destroy you. That's too easy. We came here to show you what restraint looks like, what real strength is. You fired on our medics. You erased our peacekeepers. So we returned the favor, with order, patience, and a deep personal understanding of just how fragile your system really was. This is not vengeance. This is a reboot. And you're welcome." She stepped down to thunderous, if slightly terrified, applause. Weeks later, Steele returned to Earth in silence, mission complete, mug still labeled diplomacy juice, burrito half finished. She passed through debriefings like a myth wrapped in tactical camo. Galactic records noted the Dominion's transformation from war empire to welfare state as the Steele Protocol. When asked by reporters what humanity had truly wanted, Steele simply shrugged and said, "Accountability, and maybe a little peace and quiet for once." And in that rarest moment in galactic history, nobody dared argue.